Okay, dokes. I think we're good and we're
Perfect.
off. Cool.
Hey, Matt.
Right, here we go then. Here it goes.
Happy Monday.
So obviously, intro-wise then, we're kind of just following on from the same kind of thing that we did with John Younger. So Matt, basically, we've done a similar kind of process, and we've basically reached out to the people that we've got already in our kind of freelance talent community on the site, and basically just asked if anybody had any questions. We've got a couple through. I think we've got 7, so we'll see how many we can get through in the space of half an hour. And obviously, just to kind of get your take on kind of different aspects of the whole freelance world across, you know, from your side of the water and ours. So we'll just kind of dive straight in and go with a pretty kind of basic generic one, which, like, what would be your definition of the future of work?
Ooh, good question. So I would say it's I know we have so many buzzwords like open talent, gig economy, sharing economy, so much crap. But so I would literally just call it the transformation from being predominantly full-time and in office to enabling some of these elastic talent / digital models. And so if we look at like, what does freelancing really mean? It's just digitizing contract work. Like that's literally it, right? It's saying, hey, contract work, we can do this in a digital remote manner. And it's more efficient because we can use software and the internet instead of having a full-time and physical office to facilitate these different things. Now, future of work like encompasses everything, because then there's even more terms like creator economy and all these other ones. So I like to say we start at future work and we say it's the transition from digital or from physical and full-time into remote and digital. And then where we kind of sit is there's this other segment called the freelance economy that is growing rapidly because it's now more efficient to actually hire and be a freelancer than it is to be a full-time employee if you are top talent.
Can I just jump in there, Matt? So one of the things you said there was digitizing contract work, which I think is really, really interesting, because I would agree with that massively, because there's always this question, what's the difference between a contractor and a freelancer? But what do you trying to look ahead, and obviously from your work that you've done with Gigster and Microsoft, you've obviously worked with the greatest minds in this space, but how do you see staffing companies and talent platforms kind of working, moving forward? Because some people will say, well, it disrupts the whole thing. They can work in tandem. How do you see that kind of working moving forward?
I think we will always need a layer, and let's just define what that layer means. So that layer is generally in between client and person doing the work. And if you talk about staffing, and let's also use agency. So let's use Deloitte and typical agencies also as an example. There's sort of, not to get too geeky, but when we think about software, right? You have like 0 and 1s, and then you have like actual programming languages, and you have compiling, and there's all this abstraction layers just to be able to tell a computer, do this. It's a similar thing when we're talking about getting work done, except for us, the source is sort of the freelancer and the client is at the top, and we need a middle layer to interpret both, because a freelancer knows how to be a really good designer, they know how to be a really good writer, and the client knows that they need to increase, revenue by 30%, or they need to increase conversion or increase NPS. And then in the middle, though, there's all this abstraction that the client doesn't necessarily know what the best thing is, the freelancer doesn't necessarily know what's best for the client, and we're all here trying to figure it out. And so where's this going? The past 150 years, it was easier to have an office and full-time work, and for your contractor to be handled by also a full-time company like a Deloitte or a staffing agency. And what's really, really changed is that because we're using software and because we have the internet, a lot of those sort of manual, sort of rote, repetitive tasks we no longer need. So now it's becoming easier to hire freelancers directly or to just reduce the layers. So instead of having a massive staffing agency or a massive Deloitte that's all around the world and has a bunch of beautiful offices, we really instead just need like a Gigster, which would be 40 people that were the middle layer, but they have a network of 10,000, or gigged, right? So I think, where's this going? I do think we're always going to need a middle layer, but that middle layer is reducing and is becoming more value-based instead of having to do a lot of the administrative tasks.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Harvey, I'm sure you've got plenty more.
Yeah, so we're kind of following on from that, talking about obviously big companies. One of the things that we've been pointing out is obviously when you're talking about Venturel, which is kind of similar in the sense of what we're trying to do. One of the big things that you guys talk about is how there's a gap in freelancing, and that gap being not supporting individual freelancers. So obviously we were talking about your kind of bigger sites like Fiverr, Worksome, Upwork, these kind of guys. What's your kind of take on being a huge company like that, who's obviously dealing with loads of freelancers on a daily basis and still keeping, or trying at least, to keep that supporting individual freelancers going?
So there's a reason for Fiverr and Freelancer and Upwork. And the reason is a combination of timing as well as the specific type of work done on those platforms. And let me sort of caveat that by saying that they do have a decision to evolve, and that the reason that they are where they are today is because of where we were in the past. So I think it's sexy to be able to say, like, you know, F Upwork, F Freelancer, F Fiverr. And like, listen, as a freelancer, like, do I have those kind of feelings? Like, yeah, of course, it's easier to say that. But with that said, if you look at where we're coming from, I mean, the fact that you could literally connect me sitting in India or me sitting in Miami with someone who's in Singapore, India, the UK, all around the world, like, we can't take that for granted. This is a fundamental seismic shift. And so we needed platforms that were basically going from Craigslist and saying, let's get you off of Craigslist and instead have this be defined to software developers or content writers or data scientists or data scrapers or whatever it was. So let me caveat by saying there's a place. Now, where we're going, though, is we're going to freelance being more of a niche, sort of geographically arbitraged, low skill, also low cost sort of industry, to competing directly against what we would value as high skill. And when we say high skill, we're talking about things like, you know, a large motorcycle manufacturer enabling their digital transformation to happen 100% through freelancers. Like, this is a ginormous change. And so that gap is the traditional sort of past 20 years where the digitally transaction platforms were handling more of the low skill, more geographical arbitrage, to the economy as a whole being the digital and remote and freelance based economy, having to handle large projects. And there's lots of problems in the middle. Like, one massive problem that leaders always face is the fact that hiring a freelancer is so much harder than just going through an agency. Because if you do just go through a Deloitte or an Ogilvy or you name it, the process, let's put ourselves in the leader's shoes, the process looks like, I need to increase revenue. And instead of having to figure it all out myself, I'm going to go to a baseball game and have a very nice dinner, and somebody else is going to handle all of the scoping, the sourcing. And as long as I pay $1 million to $15 million, I'm going to get a deliverable in a month or 3 months or 6 months, and I'm not going to get fired because I went with that decision. Now we introduce freelancers and we say, hey, leader, give us the exact freelancer that you need, or give us the exact outcome that you need. And instead of just taking all of this stuff off your plate, and instead of bringing you out to a baseball game, we're going to say, you create the job description yourself, you create the headline yourself, and then we're going to throw 1 million profiles at you. And it's up to you to filter what that looks like. And it's up to you to see prices that range from $1 million to $2, and to be able to decipher what you should actually go forward with. So that's the gap. The gap is, we need to go win these larger projects, and we need to have them, we need to execute them at scale and consistently. And it's just a timing thing, and we're going to get there. And in terms of where the platforms sit, there is some, I would call them fundamental dynamics that, if you're a super nerd, you've probably read Innovator's Dilemma, and you know how existing brands struggle to innovate because their core revenue streams inhibit them from wanting to go and innovate. There's a similar case in terms of a lot of these platforms. They're going to have to go away from their transaction-based model and actually really, really take more of a, I don't know if we'd call it service-based, but take more of a Shopify example, where it's, you're actually helping the freelancer, and you kind of become a client to that freelancer, versus right now you're the middle layer, that client that the freelancers need.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a great way to look at it, because obviously, from a kind of our point of view, being based in the UK, there isn't really anything like that. The kind of contract market or freelance market at the moment is still very agency dominated, which from being in kind of my position and talking to a lot of contractors or freelancers on a daily basis, a lot of them are frustrated with it, because obviously a lot of agencies have that kind of attitude of taking a very long time to do something that could take like 2 hours. Yeah, you know, which is obviously kind of where the freelance revolution is coming from, especially in the UK.